So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, please be seated. We're already running a few minutes late. Apologies for that. I would now like to welcome all of you to this joint meeting of the AFET Committee with our Subcommittee on Human Rights. A special welcome go to Chairman Udo Bullmann, and we are doing this in association with the delegation to the EU-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee, so I would also like to welcome Chairman Ryszard Czarnecki. Colleagues, we decided to convene this extraordinary exchange of views to pay tribute to the memory of Alexei Navalny, a true modern-day hero. In December 2021, and we all recall this, the European Parliament honoured his cause with the Sakharov Prize. He sacrificed his life in order to pursue his fight to liberate Russia from the current evil, brutal and corrupt regime. Therefore, let me first of all express of all my deepest condolences to his wife, Yulia Navalnaya, their children, family, friends, and all those who worked with him for the benefit of Russia. As so many leaders across the globe clearly stated in the immediate aftermath of Mr. Navalny's death, the ultimate responsibility for his death lies with Putin and the Russian authorities. It is now up to the Russian authorities to shed light on the cause and the circumstances of his death by allowing an independent and transparent international investigation. Russia's political leadership must be held accountable, and the EU may resort to impose further sanctions to this aim. The truth must be told, accountability must be ensured, and justice must be served. At the same time, however, let us not forget the incredible example of courage Mr. Navalny gave us. Having already been the victim of an attempted assassination in 2020, he was arrested and sentenced on dubious and politically motivated grounds. Since his arrest, he had been subjected to ill treatment, torture, arbitrary punishment and psychological pressure. Although imprisoned in inhuman conditions, Mr. Navalny tirelessly and courageously continued his fight denouncing the widespread corruption in Russia. With all that in mind, all those who care about democracy and freedom in Russia and elsewhere, we have a moral duty to continue the fight initiated by him, which will be led by his wife Yulia together with his close associates. The first important test for the Russian opposition will be the forthcoming so-called presidential elections, scheduled in just over 3 weeks, ahead of which the repression of the opposition in the Russian Federation is reaching levels unseen since the darkest times of the Soviet Union. We feel encouraged by the reports about Russian citizens paying tribute to Alexei Navalny in cities and towns all over the Russian Federation. We express our hope that similar actions will continue to show that the Russian people do not support a regime that stands for repression inside the country and for a brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. Alexei Navalny's life, political work and death are a testimony to the fight against apparent apathy, indifference and surrender. May it continue to encourage and inspire. So, colleagues, to pay tribute to the legacy of Mr. Navalny and discuss the challenges faced by the Russian opposition, we invited Mr. Leonid Volkov, Chief of Staff of Alexei Navalny Anti-Corruption Foundation, Ms. Yevgenia Kara-Murza, Free Russia Foundation Advocacy Director, the wife of political prisoner Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is also being detained in the same inhuman conditions as Mr. Navalny was, and whose fate is a cause of great concern. And finally, Mr. Vladimir Milov, Vice President of the Free Russia Foundation, former Vice Minister of Energy of Russia, who has been a regular guest in our committee in the past. Before we start the exchange of views, colleagues, may I ask you to have a minute of silence. I invite all who are present to stand up. Thank you. So, I now give the floor to our speakers. They will have 7 minutes each, and the first is Mr. Leonid Volkov, and he is connected remotely. Hopefully we can now get him. connected. There you go. A warm welcome. 7 minutes. The floor is yours.
Dear Chairman, dear members of the committees, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. I have to say that I'm still quite speechless. Alexei Navalny was a hero, a leader, a talented politician, but also a very close and dear friend. He will be missed and remembered, and there is a bleeding hole in my heart and in the hearts of our friends and co-workers. We are not yet ready to present our new strategy. We are working hard to find out how we can better work to make his cause win. We believe that the only thing that will not return Alexei to us, but at least will help his legacy, his victim, not to be in vain, is of course to continue his fight, and we will do it. But we have to take many decisions of how to carry on after this terrible loss. And we don't have to forget that the body is not yet released to the family, and we have to fight for even such a basic thing like a proper, decent funeral. And of course, still, the time is going. We are overwhelmed by requests. What can we do? What could the world do? The parliament, the governments? If there is still a way to put pressure on Putin to achieve change in Russia. And that's the thing we are dreaming about. We want to see how Putin's regime falls apart, how this cruel and enormously unjust tumor on the body of our country just rots and dies. It's very important for us actually that Putin sees it with his own eyes, and his lieutenants, the members of the regimes that he's built, can see how their case, their systems that they have built in the last 25 years fails, and Navalny's beautiful Russia of the future prevails. This would be the best possible monument to this great man. So, few ideas on what we should do, or maybe also on what we shouldn't do. There are unfortunately a couple of examples of don'ts that we've seen in the last few days. The British government sanctioned 6 people in connection to the death, to the murder of Alexei Navalny, and he was killed, and that goes beyond reasonable doubt, and we have all necessary proof for this. British government has sanctioned 6 people, some members of the staff of the penal colony, who were never in possession of travel passports, who would never travel to the UK, who never had any assets in the UK, who would only laugh about these sanctions, and Putin would also laugh with them. Navalny Foundation studied how Russian corruption operates, how Putin's system actually is built, who controls the money, where does the money go, what's really painful for them. We have issued our recommendations in this regard many times. Navalny himself produced a list of Putin's closest oligarchs in 2021, before going back to Russia from Berlin from rehabilitation after the poisoning, where he indicated Putin's closest friends and asset holders, and yet not all of them are sanctioned, that not all of their assets are frozen. Then the Anti-Corruption Foundation, Navalny's foundation, produced a list of 6,000 people, now it's more than 7,000 people, who are the backbone of Putin's system, his mid-level managers and friends and asset holders and so on. We've produced this list in April 2022, 2 months after the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, Putin's maybe worst and largest crime ever. In May, and we are grateful, European Parliament voted for a resolution in support of this Anti-Corruption Foundation's sanction list. It was almost 2 years ago. Nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. The European Commission didn't take measures according to this resolution. We have to push hard. Finally, there are those people whom we have investigated and discovered in Navalny's team anti-corruption investigations. Those people who still have sizable assets in the West, and those people who are dear to Mr. Putin. If I dream about what the best possible response could be, it is go after Putin's friends, seize their assets that we have found, that we have investigated, put them into a Navalny Memorial Foundation, which would provide best possible scholarships for the best independent journalists and anti-corruption investigators all around the world. Something like this. Once again, it's an exchange of views, okay? So it's not like we have a clear plan, clear strategy, and clear proposal. Alexei's death happened just 5-6 days ago. But if we want to think in a correct direction that would really make Putin and his regime suffer and would really contribute to the victory over this terrible regime, that's probably the direction we should look into, we should go. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for keeping exactly to your speaking time. I will now give the floor to Ms. Yevgenia Karamurza. Please, madam.
Chairman, members of the committees, esteemed members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. A few days ago, the murder of Alexei Navalny shocked the world. To the world, this was yet another demonstration of the nature of the Putin regime. To the Russian population, to Russian civil society, this was a personal pain, a devastating blow. We lost yet another fierce warrior, a fierce warrior for a different future for our country, a future that we can see, that we can envisage, a future that he symbolized. We lost one of the best, one of the most principled, strong fighters, and also one who gave us hope, all of us. He is not the only one. Alexei is not the only one who carries that hope. But he was a fierce warrior, and we lost him. And now we will need to work even harder, so much harder, to achieve the goals that we have set. In her 2022 report on the situation with human rights in Russia, OSCE rapporteur Professor Nussberger pointed out that repression on the inside and the war on the outside are connected to each other, as if in a communicating tube. Today, according to Memorial, the conservative number of political prisoners in the Russian Federation approaches 700 people. And according to OVD Info, over 20,000 people illegally, unlawfully detained since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine had broken out. There were, in 2022 alone, there were at least 565 minors. And criminal proceedings were initiated against at least 9 of them before they reached the age of 18, including against 16-year-old Nikita Uvarov, who was sentenced to 5 years in prison for planning to blow up an FSB building a virtual FSB building in the computer game Minecraft. OVD Info reports that in 2023 alone, at least 50 people died in detention or during arrests, and the circumstances of the death of these people are quite unclear. The regime has brought back the entire arsenal of Soviet-style repressive instruments, including torture, punitive psychiatry, sexual and physical abuse, and Stalin-era prison terms of 10, 15, 25 years to eradicate dissent and scare people into silence. Political assassination is not a new thing for us. Anna Politkovskaya, a journalist with Novaya Gazeta, was assassinated in 2006. Novaya Gazeta alone lost 6 employees to political assassinations over the years. A leader of the Russian opposition, Boris Nemtsov, was gunned down in front of the Kremlin walls in 2015. Alexei Navalny survived a poisoning attack on him before the regime threw him in prison, tortured him for 3 years, and actually succeeded in killing him. My husband, who survived 2 assassination attacks on him in 2015 and 2017, is still there, behind bars, still alive for now, sentenced to 25 years of strict regime for consistently opposing the regime of Vladimir Putin, for calling the war against Ukraine a crime that needed to be prosecuted, for calling for a Nuremberg-style tribunal for those responsible for that crime of aggression and war crimes committed there. All this is happening in the atmosphere of total censorship and propaganda used by the regime to create a warped Soviet-style image of reality in which the entire population stands behind Putin and his war and aggression of Ukraine. Meanwhile, hundreds of people got arrested over the last few days for just laying flowers to commemorate Alexei Navalny. In view of all of this, I believe it is important to reiterate a few messages. With all independent media banned and blocked, civil society institutions destroyed, and international observers and rapporteurs consistently denied entry to the country, we have only a vague idea of the scale of repression that is happening in Russia. This is why it is crucially important to support, including financially, the work of those independent journalists, civil society groups, and lawyers who do their best to monitor this situation and report on it against all odds. Second, in October of last year, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted the report by Rapporteur Peter Onzik on the illegitimacy of Vladimir Putin's regime, and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted a resolution calling on all member states to not recognize the legitimacy of Vladimir Putin as a head of state after this year's sham election. There are very clear legal justifications for this step. The constitutional amendments carried out in 2022 in Russia through a fraudulent referendum that basically destroyed the country's fundamental law and made Vladimir Putin into a czar, are not legitimate, both from the point of view of the Russian constitution and from the point of view of international norms, as repeatedly pointed out by the European Parliament and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, not to mention the fact that this so-called election will be carried out on the occupied Ukrainian territories, where people are forced to accept Russian citizenship in exchange for humanitarian aid or medication. I urge you to respond to this call and send a clear message to the Kremlin that Vladimir Putin is a criminal wanted by the ICC and not a legitimate president or a partner on the international stage. Now, the crisis of hostage-taking and imprisoning people for their beliefs or their political views is on the rise worldwide. This comes as a result of impunity that autocrats were allowed to enjoy during a prolonged period of time, almost a quarter of a century in the case of Vladimir Putin, which means that after years and sometimes even decades of ignoring or appeasing a monster, the free world is faced with the need to control the damage, a process that is accompanied by all these ethical dilemmas about giving in to terrorists, dilemmas that could have been avoided had the regime or the terrorist organization been prevented from growing into a monster in the first place. I urge you to respond more responsibly to the rising crisis of hostage-taking and political imprisonment and stand with those political prisoners, specifically in the Russian Federation, but also in Belarus, who are suffering tremendously from the regimes in these countries, for standing up to them and for wanting a different future for their countries. There are people you can save. Do what you can to save them so that they could be there tomorrow to rebuild these countries from scratch and make them into democracies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Karamurza. And now I give the floor to Vladimir Milov, also for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the European Parliament for the unwavering support of the Russian pro-democracy forces, which will be carrying on Alexei Navalny's legacy and his dream of a future normal, peaceful, democratic Russia, which lives at peace with the world and does not attack anybody and is focused on prosperity and securing rights of their own citizens. It's difficult for me to speak, much as the same as my colleagues, because I knew Alexei for almost 16 years, and I can't help recalling all these personal moments. Alexei was a remarkably normal person. He never had this snobby VIP touch of a popular politician. Last time when we did a walk with him, it was July 2020, just after the lockdown was lifted, and I think 3 weeks before he was poisoned by Putin. We did a walk in the streets of Moscow, and unbelievably we were interrupted like every couple of seconds by ordinary people who approached him and wanted to talk to him, to make a selfie, to shake his hand, and he never shrugged that off. His habit was always, he talked to his colleagues and said, listen, you got to wait. We'll discuss politics later. I want to talk to people. His vision of a normal future for Russia, freedom and peace, was resonating with millions and millions of ordinary Russians. You see how many people are laying flowers across the country despite being arrested for doing so. Just continuing what Evgenia said about the repressive nature of Putin's regime. On a more serious note, recently ahead of the presidential elections, the polling company Russian Field had published a poll when they asked people an open question, naming no specific names, but asking them, ideally, if you wanted to vote for any person you choose, who would you vote for? And Vladimir Putin only got 29% in that poll. I mentioned this in one of our latest hearings right here. Alexei Navalny was second, way above all the prime ministers, ministers of the Russian government. Many of you are asking the question, why did Putin try to kill him? This is why. Because his vision of a normal, peaceful and democratic Russia of the future was successfully competing with Putin's rule by intimidation and fear. And I had many discussions here in Europe about how and why this murder has happened. I mean, you just need to reconstruct the events that took place in the past few months. Since September, Putin has been trying to severely cut off communications and exchange of written letters with Navalny. Later in the autumn, he had arrested or forced into exile all his longtime attorneys and replaced them with temporary ones. In December, he was transported to an isolated, one of the most isolated penal colonies in Russia with absolutely no outside access and strict isolation of prisoners. Nobody knew what was happening inside these notorious walls. So this really, if you look back in retrospect, that really looks like a thorough preparation for a premeditated, cold-blooded murder. That's what it was. And it's definitely no accident that this murder happened on the day of the opening of the Munich Security Conference, when the political and security leaders from across the free world come to discuss strategy, how to move forward. That was the message. When I talk to many European politicians, and we continue to call for a strong statement from European Union about illegitimacy of Putin's next presidential term, I hear people saying, but we still have to talk to him. How do we talk if we call him illegitimate? Well, he's talking to you. He's talking to you. He's sending you a very clear message. I can do this. I can kill people at will. I can attack countries at will. I can do whatever I want. Which means that inaction matters. I repeat that yet again. Inaction matters. Any inaction on retaliating to a brutal, blatant murder of Alexei Navalny and any inaction to Putin's continuing aggression against Ukraine will be taken by Putin as a sign of weakness. That's his language that he understands. So action is necessary. And first, I would remind you of the one issue where European Union's actions have been certainly lagging behind, because EU has introduced sweeping economic sanctions against Putin, which do cause a lot of harm to Putin's economy. That's another topic, we will come back to it. But only less than 2,000 individuals from Russia are currently on EU sanctions lists. Less than 2,000. It's nothing. Because I used to work for the Russian government for 6 years, and I know many of those people who are still out there. They think that sanctions are only about those bosses on top. We who work in the second or third tier of the government can continue being involved and complicit in Putin's crimes. Nothing will happen to us. This was exactly the aim of the list of 6,000 people complicit in Putin's corruption and crimes and aggression that was proposed by Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation. You see, 6,000 is a little bit bigger than 2,000. So I think it's a good time to act. And all these people, we have strong evidence packs how complicit they are in what Putin is doing. They need to be sent a strong signal that responsibility will come. And that's the legacy of Alexei Navalny, and we believe it should be respected. And also, it is no coincidence that Navalny's last political call from prison before he was murdered was for the Russians to participate in the action called Noon Against Putin, together at the polling stations on the 17th of March, exactly at noon, to show how many people are out there against Putin and the war. Putin is really afraid of that, because this will produce the major news of the day. Not the 85% result that will be drawn up, but this. And I think this prompted Putin to actually push this red button and give the order to murder Alexei. That was his last political will for Russians to demonstrate their disobedience with Putin's regime and the war. You will see it on the 17th of March, and I think it will be only appropriate on the side of the free world to respond to these developments with not recognizing Putin as a legitimate Russian ruler for another presidential term. Thank you.
Let me thank all our three guest speakers for their contributions, and I now give the floor first to the Chair of our Subcommittee on Human Rights, Udo Bullmann, for 2 minutes.
Dear colleagues, honorable guests, I've been watching and I've been following Alexei Navalny during the last years, and I was asking myself, at the latest since he left a German hospital where he was brought back to life after the attempted assassination by Putin, what drives a man like him? I'm asking myself, what drives all our friends, mentioned by Ms. Kara Mursa, who are going to the same direction? Where do they take the courage from to face a regime of which they do not have any illusion, because they know eye to eye they are going to kill you? Putin is going to kill you. Where do you take the courage from? How can one man, in his example, put that on his shoulder? For me, there is only one possible answer. These friends have decided, when it comes to the toughest of all situations, to pay with their life for freedom, for democracy, and for peace. And what is our conclusion in a situation like that? Yes, we have to pay tribute. Yes, we bow down to honor Alexei and all the friends in similar situations. But there have to be very clear-cut conclusions for us, and our guests remind us on that. First, no one of those who are responsible, no one of those who are guilty for what has happened and what is happening should dare to think that they could walk the globe, they travel the world without finally being taken accountable. Hold to accountability, and international justice is waiting for them. And it's our responsibility to organize for that. Secondly, to honor the legacy, let us be courageous. We ourselves, and it doesn't cost us so much, have to be courageous to face a regime that is putting this on the shoulder of its citizens. Let's be courageous and let's stand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Udo. Very wise words. I now give the floor to Ryszard Czarnecki, the head of the EPD delegation to Russia, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Dear guests and friends, honourable members of the European Parliament. Last week in our Parliament we had gathered a great panel of Russian opposition representatives, including with Mr. Milov. We discussed the challenges that the opposition was facing in the light of the Russian presidential election. We now, just 2 days later, Alexei Navalny, the Kremlin's most vocal adversary, a beacon of hope for countless Russians, and a dear friend to many in the room, would meet a tragic end. The assassination of Boris Nemtsov and Anna Politkovskaya had already conveyed clear warnings of how dangerous it was to speak out against Putin. Nevertheless, there are still many courageous individuals who dare to do so. Over the past decade, more than 3,500 prisoners have been prosecuted on politically motivated charges in Russia. They are faced with the prospect of torture, psychological pressure, and other forms of ill treatment. Exactly 1 year before Mr. Navalny's death, our Parliament adopted a resolution condemning the inhuman circumstances in which he was detained. Today, I wish to reiterate that call. We ask for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners, among them Mr. Vladimir Kara-Murza. Thank you for your presence, Madam, who is detained in the same inhuman condition as Mr. Navalny. We condemn the human rights violation taking place in Russian penal colonies. We'll continue to stand by all those fighting for freedom and democracy inside Russia. And we'll also continue to stand by those fighting the Kremlin's oppression outside of Russia, especially the brave Ukrainians. Finally speaking, as long as we hold true to our democratic values and do not give up the fight, Alexei Navalny will live on. May his lifelong dedication and his unwavering belief in a better future be remembered today and all days to come. Thank you. Spasiba.
Thank you, Ryszard. Now, colleagues, we have roughly 20 minutes. I have to be very strict on time, and unfortunately today I cannot give all colleagues the floor who are requesting to take the floor, simply because we are under enormous time pressure. We have further items on the agenda. So, first of all, it's one speaker per group, that's for sure, and it's maximum 2 minutes. I understand the first speaker for the EPP is Sandra Kalniete.
I would ask you to put on the airs, because I will speak in Latvian. Navalnijs bija varonīgs cilvēks. taču viņa nāve nedrīkst palikt tikai skumju un piemiņas runu līmenī. Demokrātiskajai pasaulē ir jākoncentrē savu spēki, lai vājinātu Putina režīmu. Tā kā to darīja Reigans vājinot Padomju Savienību. Gan sankcionējot Navalny fonda atklātos korumpantus, gan atbalstot Krievijas opozīcijas pārstāvi, kur turpina Navalny cīņu. Mums ir jāatbalsta neatkarīgie žurnālisti, cilvēktiesību cīnītāji, disidenti. Mums atkal un atkal ir jāprasa politieslodzīto atbrīvošana. Taču īstā cīņa par Putina režīmu sakāvi notiek Ukrainā. Eiropas Savienībai un NATO valstīm ir jāatbalsta Ukrainas cīņa līdz uzvarai. Nevis as long as it takes. Ir jāpārtrauc vilkt sarkanās līnijas un baidīties no Putina draudiem par atomtriecienu. Krievijas vēsture parāda, ka tā nekad nav uzbrukusi stiprākam pretiniekam. Mūsu ekonomiskais potenciāls ir 25 reizes lielāks nekā Krievijai. Ja katra valsts atbalstītu Ukrainu ar 0,25% no sava IKP, tad Ukraina uzvarētu. Mēs nedrīkstam atzīt Putina ievēlēšanu par leģitīmu, jo vēlēšanas būs viltotas. Un mēs nedrīkstam atkārtot vēsturiskās kļūdas un atgriezties pie tirāna appeasement stratēģija, kā tas, kura noveda līdz Otrajam pasaules karam. Mums ir jārīkojās apņēmīgi un ātri, tik apņēmīgi, kā rīkojās Aleksejs Navalnijs. Paldies!
Thank you, Sandra. For the S&D, the speaker is Mr. Shimoshevich.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak in Polish. To jest kolejna tragiczna wiadomość, jaka wstrząsa nami, docierająca z Rosji. Pani Karamurza wymieniła nazwiska dwojga wcześniejszych ofiar reżimu Putina, ale wszyscy wiemy, że ta lista jest znacznie dłuższa. I ludzi, którzy oddali swoje życie walcząc o prawdę, o uczciwą, demokratyczną Rosję, o to, żeby obywatele Rosji mogli korzystać z elementarnych praw i wolności ludzkich, ta lista jest dłuższa. Chciałbym mieć nadzieję, że nie będzie już dłuższa w przyszłości, ale tak długo, jak będzie istniał ten niegodziwy reżim, nie możemy mieć takiej pewności. Wydaje mi się, że powinniśmy domagać się publicznie dopuszczenia niezależnych zagranicznych ekspertów do wyjaśnienia przyczyn śmierci Aleksieja Nawalnego. I powinniśmy z góry zadeklarować, że odmowa dopuszczenia takich ekspertów przez władze Rosji będzie jedynie dowodem, potwierdzeniem, przyznaniem się przez nie do tego, że Aleksiej Nawalny został zamordowany i że władze Rosji nie zgodzą się na to, żeby zostało to wyjaśnione. Powinniśmy zażądać także od naszych państw członkowskich nałożenia dalszych surowych sankcji na Rosję. Moim zdaniem krokiem minimalnym jest nałożenie sankcji zgodnych z tą tak zwaną listą Nawalnego, chociaż wszyscy ci, którzy popierają reżim Putina, pracują dla niego, powinni odczuć nasz sprzeciw i naszą pogardę. Wreszcie powinniśmy zrobić znacznie więcej w naszych własnych krajach, żeby uświadamiać naszym współobywatelom, jak zbrodniczym reżimem jest ten, który został po raz kolejny w historii stworzony w Rosji. Wszyscy powinniśmy to rozumieć, temu się sprzeciwiać i znać, jakim zagrożeniem dla całej Europy jest ten reżim. Dziękuję.
Thank you. For Renew, Bernhard Getter.
Mes chers collègues, Madame Karamurza, Monsieur Milov, le courage a un nom. Le courage s'appelle Alexeï Navalny. Mais le constater nous oblige. Le constater nous oblige. Nous oblige d'abord à ne pas laisser gagner Monsieur Poutine en Ukraine. Cela signifie des choses aujourd'hui extraordinairement concrètes. Cela signifie que l'Allemagne doit livrer des missiles Taurus à l'Ukraine parce qu'elle en a besoin. Cela signifie que la France, si les F-16 ne suffisent pas, ce qui est une possibilité, doit livrer des avions à l'Ukraine. Deuxièmement, le courage d'Alexeï Navalny nous oblige à ne pas confondre, jamais, à cesser de confondre, car nous le faisons trop souvent, Poutine et sa clique avec le peuple russe. Il y a quelques décennies déjà, j'étais comme correspondant du Monde à Moscou. J'ai vu la Russie s'éveiller quand le couvercle a été levé. Qu'on ne me dise pas, qu'on ne dise jamais que les Russes ne savent pas ce que c'est que la liberté, que les Russes, par je ne sais quel mystère génétique, n'approuveraient pas et ne voudraient pas de la démocratie. Nous les avons vus vibrer de bonheur, vibrer d'ambition politique, vibrer à la liberté. Le courage d'Alexeï Navalny nous oblige donc à une troisième chose, à soutenir le peuple russe et à le soutenir contre son tyran et à soutenir au premier chef l'opposition, ou plutôt les oppositions. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Bernard. The Greens, I don't have a request. You do? Okay, Jordi.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my condolences to family, friends and supporters of Alexei Navalny. My solidarity goes to all Russian citizens inside and outside Russia today mourning the loss of this political leader and paying tribute to him. I condemn his death, his political assassination, which responsibility lays with the Russian authorities, the same regime responsible for so many crimes, amongst them the crime of aggression against Ukraine and other war crimes. The obsessive persecution against Navalny, the sick willingness to silence him and everything he embodied, the ill treatments and inhumane conditions to which he was subjected, all this surely contributed to his deterioration, but not to the weakening of his determination, which remained unbroken until the end. There has to be an urgent independent investigation into the exact circumstances of his death, and those responsible have to be held accountable. All my admiration to all those courageous Russian citizens laying flowers, and to all those who will continue his fight and honor his legacy, and also to all those many that lost their life in fighting for a better democratic Russia. This House awarded Mr. Navalny the Sakharov Prize for his commitment to democracy and fundamental rights, for his courage in returning to his country and continuing the fight against oppression and against corruption from within Russia, and thus putting his life in danger. He could have chosen otherwise, but he decided not to succumb to threats from or fear to a corrupt regime. The fight against oppression and for freedom is a honorable fight. It is an essential fight for human dignity. It's a struggle that has many worthy supporters around the world. The European Parliament and the European Union will continue to support this struggle always and everywhere. I only wish this support could be more efficient and more consistent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordi. For the ECR group, Anna Fotiga.
Thank you, Chair. I pay tribute to Alexei Navalny and to all victims of the Kremlin regime, both during time of Russian Federation and earlier during the Soviet Union time. There are millions of them. Honestly speaking, death of Navalny is a very bitter moment for a person like myself, warning for decades about nature of Kremlin regime, Putin in particular, and his surrounding. I can only echo Evgenia Karamurza. We do not know exactly what kind of scenario, except of the killer's instinct and cruelty, was behind this. I must say that I am concerned and afraid of the fate of current prisoners, including external prisoners like Mikhail Saakashvili, whom I consider Putin's prisoner as well. Of course, we have to request unconditional, immediate release of all of them, but I am absolutely sure that real change and sanctions, naturally, much broader than current and much broader than Navalny's list, but real change may only come after defeat of Russia in war against Ukraine. That's clear, and we have to put an effort to obtain this. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no request to take the floor from the ID group on the left. I have two more colleagues who would have liked to are on the speakers list, Mr. Jordanov and Ms. Kanko. If it's 1 minute each, then we can make it. Mr. Jordanov, 1 minute.
1 minute. I will speak in Bulgarian. Господин председател, Путин няма да се промени. Путин и негови режим, това са заразно зло. Решението е заразното зло да бъде максимално изолирано, напълно изолирано. Големия въпрос е има ли сили руската опозиция да се обедини и да започне да променя руският народ. Защото е факт, че руският народ е този, който избира диктатор като Путин. И това е голяма цел. Как да се промени народа? Върху това трябва да се работи. Руската опозиция трябва да се обедини и първата задача, която трябва да си постави, е да започне навсякъде да говори само за едно. За победа на Украйна срещу Русия във войната. За победа. За прогонване на руските агресори от Украйна. Завършвам, като ще кажа само следното. Нека да помогнем на руската опозиция, като изолираме руският режим по всички възможни канали и пътища. Благодаря.
Thank you, colleague. And finally, Asita, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I will speak in Dutch. Beste collega's, Poetin is niet aan zijn proefstuk toe. De lijst van vermoorde Russische politieke opposanten, journalisten en mensenrechtenactivisten wordt alsmaar langer. De precieze omstandigheden van het overlijden van Alexei Navalny mogen dan nog onduidelijk zijn en vragen om een onmiddellijk en onafhankelijk internationaal onderzoek. Er is geen twijfel over wie ultiem verantwoordelijk is: de despoot in het Kremlin. Deze laatste heeft er geen moeite mee om zijn wreedheid te demonstreren door een moeder, als in een klassieke Griekse tragedie, de rouw om haar zoon te ontzeggen. Het lichaam van Alexei Navalny moet dan ook zo snel mogelijk teruggegeven worden aan zijn nabestaanden. De Europese Commissie, de Raad en de lidstaten moeten de dood en vervolging van Russische opposanten hoog op de agenda blijven zetten. En wij moeten ons inzetten voor de nalatenschap van Navalny door de Russische samenleving te bevrijden van apathie, onverschilligheid en overgave. Alle steun aan de families.
Thank you, dear Asita. And now back to our guests. If I may ask you to respond for about 2 minutes each, then we can make it roughly in time. Who would like to begin? Perhaps in reversed order. Ms. Karamurza first. Would you like to start? Madam.
Thank you very much for all the kind words and all the statements. And I would like to thank Monsieur Guetta for making a very, very important remark about not putting the sign of equation between a country and the regime that has usurped power in this country and is oppressing its own population while carrying out wars of aggression against our neighbors. This is something that my husband, Vladimir Karamurza, whose work I continue while he is unable to do that, has been saying for years. Please do not equate Vladimir Putin's government with the entire country. Please do not see the diversity of our country. Please see the faces of those people who are fighting for a better future. Please show solidarity with those who risk their freedoms and very often their lives. And yet again, we saw the proof of that. They risk that, everything they have, to show you that a different Russia is possible and that you can step over your fears somehow, that you can... these people show us that there is something bigger than their fears, something bigger than life itself. Please stand with them and show solidarity with them, because the only guarantee of peace and stability on this continent is a democratic Russia. There is no other way. For as long as there is some kind of a regime in Russia, warmongering will continue and repression will continue, and no one will ever feel safe on this continent. We are fighting for a democratic Russia that will be living peacefully with its own citizens, respecting the rights of its own citizens and respecting the rights of its neighbors. Stand in solidarity with us. Help us achieve this goal so that we can achieve that long-lasting peace and stability on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Karamurza. And now, Mr. Milov, for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your warm words of solidarity. We know that these are more than just words, and you, the European Union, the European Parliament, have done so much already to counter Putin's regime and its aggression against Ukraine, but we clearly see, in the light of the recent events and the murder of Alexei Navalny, that more needs to be done. And I wanted to convey, after Navalny was murdered, I literally received like tens of thousands of messages from people across Russia who really want to see solidarity from the free world and first and foremost Europe, free and democratic Europe, solidarity with those Russians who don't want dictatorship, who don't want oppression, they don't want war. And there are many of those. You've seen people laying flowers. You also have seen huge lines and queues in support of the presidential candidate Boris Nadezhdin, who was not allowed to run. That was the only candidate who promoted the message to end the war. People were lining up to support him. There were no lines to be drafted to fight in Ukraine inside Putin's army. Putin has to hunt for draftees. But to end the war, people are lining up. They really want to hear that message of solidarity, and they want to see strong and tough action on part of the European Union to give Putin a clear signal that he won't get away with what he's doing and with the murder of Navalny. It's pretty clear. We already have been saying what needs to be done. We just hope for your action and that the words of solidarity will transform into something specific, and we're always here to help and provide you best advice on what exactly needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Volkov, are you still connected? Then I give the floor to you now.
Thanks a lot for your interventions and for the respect for Navalny's work and legacy. We, on our side, his friends, his team, will do whatever possible to make his legacy live through work. Navalny always said, you don't have to be devastated, you don't have to stop working. Everyone has to do something every day. Not maybe something huge, but nothing is not an option. And we will continue to live and work by this principle. Vladimir already mentioned one important part of Navalny's political legacy, which is the None Against Putin political campaign in Russia. Brave people all across the country will come to polling places of the fake presidential election. Not to vote, not to pick one of the mock candidates in the fake election, but to present themselves, to show that they exist, while the propaganda pretends to make a point that they just don't exist, that they are a marginal minority, that everyone supports Putin. These people will take risks. There will be a lot of attempts to embarrass them, to scare them off. Probably we will see stories about, officers of conscription, officers responsible for conscriptions coming to this polling station and handing, draft letters to young men just coming to the election. And still people will show up, and they will show taking huge risks. One important thing, that Putin is not Russia, and Russia is not Putin. So what we ask for is respect for this idea, which was Alexei Navalny's probably main political idea, that Russia can be a decent, normal European country, that Russians are not different from Europeans, despite everything that Putin is trying to prove. And
Mr. Volkov, may I ask you to conclude?
Yeah, and this idea has very simple consequences. Don't recognize Putin as Russia's legitimate president or representative. Help Russians who are fighting against him, both inside the country and abroad. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Karamurza, Mr. Milov, Mr. Volkov, thank you so much for attending today's joint meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee and our Subcommittee on Human Rights. Since we're running late, let me just say that we will continue to support the Russian opposition in its fight for justice, freedom and peace, and we will continue to urge Russia to immediately and unconditionally release all political prisoners. Among some of the names we have been listening to have been mentioned today. So, colleagues, we will continue monitoring the situation in Russia in the coming weeks and months closely, and I will now conclude this item and immediately go on to the next item, item number 10. Thank you once again for attending our session.